Right now, how about the Audible Live Thursday nights, footballguys.com? It is Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom, and Dr. Jeanne Bramwell, Matt Waldman on vacation as we all take a little bit of a break during this last month of July as things get heated. It's June 29th, but July's right around the corner. Lots of vacation time. But Bloom, still some things to go over. And as anyone will tell you that's gone to the grocery store, fantasy football back on the forefront of everybody's mind because the racks are full of the old fantasy magazines.
Yeah, it's time. It's time to think about drafts. It's time to think about strategies. We're going to get our summer vacations in, and then it's going to be training camp. And that's when really I think we'll all get that buzz, get the juices flowing again, as all of this speculation and projection will turn into real things happening on the field. So it's an exciting time to know that the most of the off season is behind us, and then the roller coaster ride is soon underway.
Dr. Jeanne Bramwell joining us. Dr. Jeanne, can you tell that I am excited to go to the Shelby Museum in Las Vegas next week because I'm wearing my Shelby hat and my Shelby shirt, and my Shelby's sitting out in the driveway.
Something you've been looking forward to for a while.
Yeah. Good to talk to you as always, as we'll jump in with some injury news with Dr. Jeanne, then Bloom and I'll hash it out. We got some Carlos Hyde stuff I talked about last week, Bloom, we really need to go over. But first, Dr. Jeanne, I want to talk about Zach Orr and, the neck, the C1. Let's discuss what this injury is, why he initially retired, and then what possibly could have changed to have him unretire. This is something, it's a unique situation. The Ravens didn't tender him as a restricted free agent, so he's free and clear to sign with anybody. His agent said 15 teams have contacted him. Of course, it was, a big part of what Baltimore did defensively last year. And now is one of the most interesting free agents. But what kind of concern, what kind of caution? It's a neck injury. Those are always tricky. What's the latest in your insight on Zach Orr?
So what got him to retire wasn't an injury necessarily. It was a malformation. It was an incomplete formation of the spinal bones, the ring around his spinal cord, and it's something that's congenital. It would have been present at the time he was born, which makes you wonder whether or not there were any issues as we got into combine and otherwise, and whether it was something that was known then and whether or not somebody had signed off on it. And that may have been the case because what we're reading is one of the reasons that there was some concern is that he had some herniated discs around there in the area that made him a little bit higher risk of injury going forward. And those things seem to have cleared up. So he had sought a couple of additional opinions. I think the Ravens, heard from Orr himself and their doctors that there wasn't much chance of him being cleared to play. And now that that's happened and Orr himself is a lot more comfortable with the situation and the injuries that he did have around the area, assuming the herniated discs were in that area and not a little bit lower in his back, have resolved, he's been cleared to play, and he seems like he's interested to play, and he's got that mental side of things behind him. So sounds like it was definitely a surprise to Orr. It was surely a surprise to the Ravens, and he was a player that it took him a little bit of time to blossom into the player that he became before he retired there, but he was a very good linebacker, arguably as good as C.J. Mosley overall as an every down player. So he's going to take a lot of interest around the league. The Lions have made some additions in the offseason. Jared Davis, chief among them during the draft, but there's definitely room for another player there. And I would imagine that if when word gets around the league that Orr is going to be available, the teams that have some room around their salary cap will be looking at adding him.
Let's just go ahead and talk about Andrew Luck. Basically, Jeanne, I'll serve it up to you like this.
Look at this morose blankety blank right here.
Yeah, morose. Yeah, right. I know it's like a 40-degree day. But is Andrew Luck a 40-degree day? I mean, should Andrew Luck not throwing yet affect your approach to drafting him, or is this one of those injury situations that we should assume will proceed on a schedule that means that he's the player we're going to expect, especially because the last 2 years he was playing with this injury?
Yeah, so I don't think it should affect where you draft him. I don't think anything that has happened thus far should raise any red flags or concern. We didn't really get a straight answer from Jim Irsay. Didn't expect it to. He said that there wasn't an issue with the bicep and the labrum looked okay, and then he walked those comments back pretty quickly afterwards, saying, well, yeah, he actually did have surgery on his labrum. And a number of specialists in our community, Jeff Budoff and others, suggested, based on what we knew, that everything pointed to some sort of a labral injury that got to the point where both Luck and the Colts said, well, we don't really want to worry about this through another season and manage his reps and be concerned about whether or not what happened in 2015 would be more likely than what happened in 2016, which is, he looked very good last year for most of the season. 2015, not so much. But it was a labral repair, and it's an overhead throwing athlete, and there's no guarantee. It's not 100% certainty that Luck can recover from this. Now, there's really no reason to believe that he won't, but they were going to be extraordinarily cautious with him and take his throwing program very slowly. A little bit different situation than what's going on with Cam Newton, who's a little bit ahead of what his initial rehab schedule was like. We're hearing Andrew Luck is not throwing yet, and I don't think that was to be expected. I think what we should expect is, I'm not even going to be shocked if Luck starts training camp on the PUP list. That doesn't mean that he won't be ready for opening week, but you hope that sometime in the next month, we're hearing that he's throwing and that he's gradually building up some arm strength so that he'll be ready for week one. The longer it goes that he doesn't throw, that he's not cleared to throw, then I think we need to be concerned. But I don't think we're at the point yet where he's not going to be able to build up his arm strength to recover. It was going to be a 4 to 6 month recovery period from the beginning. The surgery was done sometime in January, so you'd expect him to be ready in the middle of July, sort of at the latest. And I think we're still on target with that. So, so often happens this time of the off season, maybe you get a little bit of a note from players around the time of the draft when there's a lot more press conferences that are going on, or maybe in the OTAs when you see players go through the locker room. You saw Luck bristle a little bit at the questions he was getting earlier in the month at the Colts mini camp, because I think he's just being tired of being asked those questions when this was kind of his expectation all along. So the next little bit of information we're going to get is whether or not he's going to be ready to throw in advance of training camp and what that means for his first couple of weeks and how careful they're going to be with him. But for now, I would work under the assumption that he's going to be ready for week one.
It is the Audible Live, and the chat room is reacting to me. And Marcus is like, what? No Jim Irsay joke, Jeanne? Marcus, Jeanne is too good for those type of jokes. But for me, yes. NBA getting a lot of headlines. Jim Irsay says, hold my beer. I'm going to get to Twitter. And I'm going to get to talking about Jamaal Charles cutting at full speed. Now, we didn't see that, Dr. Jeanne, during mini camps. He was cutting probably, let's say, 75% speed, maybe 80% speed. Now he says he's doing it full speed, feeling good, basically 2 years down with knee injuries. And everyone will point to the number, the big 3-0, but isn't it more like 28 if he's lost 2 years? And now, we're here at the beginning of July, basically, and Jamaal Charles, a month away from camp, is already cutting at full speed. I still want to see him take a hit on the knee, but your thoughts with this latest news?
Well, cutting at full speed and cutting versus contact are two totally different situations. And one of the things that we continually reference is, until you're out there in a contact situation, you're taking hits from unexpected angles, and your body has to produce when it's put in situations that it's not ready for. You're not really sure. And the other thing with Jamaal Charles, part of the reason he's had some difficulty over the past couple of years is he doesn't know when the pain is going to be there, doesn't know when the swelling is going to recur, and taking a hit on the knee or potentially a funny step or a twist could make some of those issues recur. Even if the meniscus repairs have gone well and he's had a full recovery. So it's great to hear that he feels like he's in a comfortable place going into training camp, but I still think we're a long way from seeing Charles prove that he can get through consecutive practices without any additional difficulties with the knee, and that he has actually, even though he feels 100%, that he can actually play to 100% of his previous form.
Jeanne, just a more general question about tight ends. I'll give you a choice, and you can choose to sidestep the choice, but we got really the three highest efficiency tight ends: Rob Gronkowski, Jordan Reed, and Tyler Eifert. Gronk might cost you a mid-second round pick. He's coming off of back surgery. We saw him chasing Tom Brady around on opening day at Fenway Park. Jordan Reed really doesn't have an injury that he was rehabbing over the offseason, but we know what his injury history looks like. He was healthy for about 10 games last year. Gronk was healthy for about 4. Tyler Eifert was healthy for about 6 He's coming off of back surgery also. But Reed, 3rd, 4th rounder, Eifert, 6th rounder. Just personally, as a fantasy football player, which, if any, would you be inclined to take, or are you equally inclined to take them all?
I don't think I'm equally inclined to take them all. My concern right now would be for Tyler Eifert and some of the things we've heard this offseason. He really should have had enough time to recover. Not that he's been slow to recover in the past, but it seemed like there's been quite as much optimism around the Bengals with Eifert so far. And it's been another 4 to 6 weeks since we've heard any updates on him. So he may well be ready to go at training camp. But as of right now, I think I'd be least likely to take him at his established ADP. Again, not to say that I'm concerned about Tyler Eifert in the same way I was this time last year, when it was evident that he had a little bit more extensive procedure than what had been let on, and that he really wasn't going to be ready to go. Hopefully, that Eifert surgery happened in December, so there should be plenty of time. And that goes this same thing with Gronkowski. You worry about back injuries, you worry about repeat back injuries. Both of these guys have been dealing with back issues off and on. This is Eifert's first surgery, but not Gronkowski's. I think the issue with Gronkowski is there's just so much upside there. If he is healthy, and he certainly appears to be, there shouldn't be a whole lot to be concerned about. And the injuries that he's had, from the knee injury to the arm injury and the infection-related issues that went along with that, this back injury is really the only degenerative thing that you might think to have a little bit more concern over time. And we know that players with ACL injuries have a little bit higher risk of injury in the future, but I think those things are well enough behind him that if Gronkowski shows up to training camp healthy, I wouldn't be concerned about him at all. You mentioned Jordan Reed really isn't rehabbing anything. The concern with him is his concussion history. I don't think we have any reason to be concerned about the shoulder at all. So you're working with the same level of concern with Reed this offseason as you have been in previous off seasons, which is you realize that if he does suffer a concussion, you're probably looking at a multi-week injury, and something that could stretch even a little bit longer than that. So I think everybody has to decide what their risk tolerance is with Gronkowski in particular, but I think Gronkowski and Reed are reasonable bets at their current ADP, and I'd like to see a little bit more positivity on Eifert before recommending him at his current ADP.
He is Dr. Jean Bramall, footballguys.com. You follow him on Twitter at Jean Bramall. And I wanted to ask you about Russell Wilson dropping some LBs, because I'm always nervous when people lose weight. But the chat room wants to know about your thoughts on Jaylon Smith. And I thought that was more interesting than Russell Wilson's dropped some pounds. So yeah. Jaylon Smith, what's your thoughts there?
I can't wait to see Jaylon Smith in training camp. That's my thought. This is going to be interesting in so many different ways. We know that it takes nerve injuries a long time to heal. And even in some of the worst case scenarios with Peyton Manning and otherwise, you saw some muscle atrophy even when he recovered well enough to at least come back close enough to the form to play. And everything we've heard so far is that Smith is going to try to play this season in a brace, which is unprecedented in a cutting and a rangy position like weak side linebacker. So I think the first thing to be mindful of is he going to practice in a brace? Is he going to participate in those first preseason games in a brace? And then if he does, he in some of those videos looked like he was moving pretty well. Now there was a little bit of a clunky gait that I thought he had, but the more he gets used to the brace, maybe there's enough ability there that he'll be able to at least hold his own. I don't think he can be the player that he was at Notre Dame before his injury wearing that brace, but that doesn't mean that he can't be effective enough. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not he's recovered enough to not need the brace, which portends really well for his future, and if not, how effective he can be in the brace. So the first couple of weeks of training camp to see what he's practicing are going to be important, and I can't wait to see him on the field at full strength to see if he can pull this off.
Jean, informed by just your general very sober and very reliable takes on things, or a medical perspective, and also you may be swayed as a member of Team Audible when we talk about this, my son, Marshawn Lynch, but he's been away from the game for a year. You could say it's going to be harder for him to get football shape. You could say his body is healed up. He knows how to get there. He was also pretty banged up the last time we saw him. What side of this debate are you finding yourself on when it comes to some people saying, I don't want anything to do with Marshawn Lynch, and others like myself, for instance, saying, I love Marshawn Lynch in the 3rd or 4th round?
I'm not betting against him. Maybe that's my personal bias, and I do think we have to be concerned about his conditioning and his back in particular, which is something that has flared up on him multiple times. But you just get the sense that Lynch wants to come back and play. He's going to be excited about playing for his hometown team in Oakland, and if he makes it through training camp without too much difficulty, I don't see any reason to be concerned about him. He strikes me as a player that would keep himself in as good a condition as possible for multiple different reasons. But we're not going to really know until we see him out on the field and how much Oakland is going to allow him to do. So another great story in training camp that we'll get a chance to see where we are. And I don't think that's going to be a fooler. If the Oakland is comfortable with him not risking compensatory injuries by putting him in training camp right away, and he gets through the first couple of weeks without any type of injury issues or flare-ups, then I think he's going to be good to go, and I'd be happy to have him.
Couple more for Dr. Jeanne Bramwell before we cut him loose tonight, and then Bloom and I'll go over some news from around the National Football League. And from the chat room, a couple of ones here. First off, Dave, it's his first time watching the Audible Live. Longtime listener, first-time watcher. So, Dave, appreciate it. Thumbs up, and thanks for reacting to us. And I want to tie it in because he asked about, of course, Reed and concussions. We had an earlier question from Jordan saying, Jeanne, how common is cold laser therapy for treating concussions and other type of injuries?
I don't know anything about cold laser therapy. I'll look into it. It's not something that I'm certain that is all that common. And I'm not really sure what the mechanism there would be. We've seen some hypothermia therapy for spinal injuries. We've seen hypothermia therapy for other sorts of injuries out in the field as far as trauma goes, but I'm not certain that that's the same mechanism that we'd see for concussion therapy or otherwise. So I'll take a look into that. As far as Jordan Reed and concussions, I think that conversation is the same as anybody that's had either multiple concussions or a single concussion that's taken a while to recover from. And we've had this kind of debate out on the show before where, you're allowing a player to return, so you're assuming that they fully recovered for a concussion, and that would seem to imply that they're not necessarily at higher risk for another concussion in the future. At least we can't define exactly why, but I think it stands to reason that a player that's had a concussion in the past probably has either some genetic or anatomic factors or the positional factors that would make them a little bit more likely. So it's really hard to say, he's fully recovered from a concussion, so he's not necessarily higher at risk because there are probably it's a multifactorial situation. So what we do know is that teams, despite that, we know they take more care in almost every situation if they have a player, regardless of talent, regardless of situation, who's taken a long time to recover in the past or has had multiple concussions. We've seen it with Jordan Cameron. We saw it with Javad Best. Lots of players end up retiring if they've had multiple concussions in the past, and we're not sure how they're going to recover. Players who've had multiple concussions in the same year end up taking a little bit more time to recover. Luke Kuechly wasn't cleared to return to the field last year after passing concussion protocol because there were some concerns about him. Jordan Reed is definitely a player that we've seen Washington take a little bit extra care with. So it's really difficult to put a percentage risk or a relative risk on the likelihood that Jordan Reed suffers a concussion this year. We know he's going to be involved in plays over the middle. We know he's going to take hits. Whether or not one of those hits leads to a concussion is really impossible to predict, but we do know that if that hit comes at any point during the season, it's unlikely to be just a 1 week absence. So, you have to balance that in with Reed's upside in that particular offense and his particular target counts, knowing that if there is an issue that comes up, it's going to take him likely a little bit longer to return.
Jeanne, I was talking to Paul Charchian on the couch today, and I was putting together an article trying to break down the reasons you would or wouldn't choose at the top of the draft David Johnson versus Le'Veon Bell versus Ezekiel Elliott. And one of the things that comes up is that if you're drafting, we think about this with wide receivers and tight ends. If you draft one, you're basically drafting the quarterback too. We don't think about it as much with running backs, but at that high in the draft, if Ben Roethlisberger goes down, Le'Veon Bell is probably no longer worth that top 3 pick. If Carson Palmer goes down, David Johnson's probably not worth that top 3 pick. Dak Prescott, it's arguable with Ezekiel Elliott. To me, maybe he wouldn't lose that much. And certainly Prescott seems to be the least injury prone or injury risk at this point. Do you think this has a place at this most important pick of the draft? And what's your general opinion on the ability of Palmer and Roethlisberger to hold up over a whole year at this point in their careers?
Yeah, I mean, you generally know how I feel about predicting the likelihood that a player makes it through a full season. We've seen both of those players, because of offensive line issues or because of their style of play, put themselves in situations, as Tony Romo did, to potentially sustain a significant injury. You're already hearing Ben Roethlisberger talk about retirement, how real that is. It's hard to know. Carson Palmer's not sure he's going to play next year. I don't know how much that plays a role into how likely these guys make it through the season and whether or not their body is already telling them that there's going to be issues moving forward. I think the nice thing about Johnson and Bell is that you're insulated a little bit in that they can do so many things, and that they're not reliant on their offensive line to open up every hole, and they're not reliant on a sustaining offense for them to be effective, because they're part of what draws them to the top of the first round anyway is their ability to have 70 to 80 or more double-digit targets in a season. So I think they're insulated from that a little bit. I'm not too worried about Le'Veon Bell's injury history. A couple of things have certainly been significant for him, but they're not necessarily things that should be longer-term issues. And it seems like of all the injuries he's had recently, the core muscle repair is the one that should be easier for him to recover from. And he's already showing signs. He's doing stuff, football and non-football related activities that would suggest that he's been fully cleared and he's not feeling himself restricted in any way. Elliott's offensive line issues, I think there are still some things to iron out there to, I'm not sure that we should be ready to make the assumption yet that Dallas's offensive line is going to be every bit as good this year as it was last year, or that Dak Prescott won't have any difficulties as he continues to assimilate and adapt to what defenses are about to throw at him. But I don't have any particular concerns about either one of those players at this point. I think you have to take all of those things into account, and I would imagine that they probably already are taken into account in the ADP, and maybe those guys aren't quite as far ahead of the next tier as they would have been last year based on some of those issues, but I don't think there's any question that they belong at the top of the first round.
He is Dr. Jeanne Bramall of footballguys.com, joins us every week, and we thank him as always. Dr. Jeanne, great to see you, my friend. Take care, and I will see you in 2 weeks.
That'll work. Enjoy the museum. We'll talk soon, guys.
We'll do that. There he goes, Dr. Jeanne Bramall of footballguys.com. Follow him on Twitter at Jeanne Bramall. It is the Audible Live. And listen, I hear you. I know you've been kicking butt in your local leagues for years. Will this be the year that you take the next step and start winning some real cash? Take your talents to the FFPC, the home of season-long fantasy football with leagues and contests to fit all budgets and interests. Do not miss the FFPC experience, my friends. Join your fellow players today and go to myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. It's FFPC, the home of season-long, high-stakes fantasy football. Bloom, great to have you back, buddy.
Yeah.
Is this vacation time as we go through?
Sure.
I love when you smile at my announcer voice.
Yes. WNBC.
Got to get that right. Got to get it correct. I want to share a quick story that I shared on last week's show and then talked about it to myself. But I want to toss it to you because I did a experts draft last week in person at Fan Draft. It's a bar here in Parker. And there were other experts there. Peter Jennings was there. Brad Evans was there, etc. Courtney and Ashley from Her Fantasy Football were there. All the people that live in and around Denver that do fantasy football for a living. Anyway, Carlos Hyde was drafted, let's say in the 5th round, something like that. And Peter was the one who drafted him. And I jokingly looked over at him. I was like, they don't like him. And he's like, what? Hello, what's this? And he ended up texting a friend of all of ours. Let me just say it's the top NFL insider that there possibly could be. And got back to Peter and was like, yeah, there's other backs that have been impressing. Something that I've heard as well. The Carlos Hyde ADP. This was a real hot topic last week, and a lot of fantasy owners, I see it, Bloom, right? I mean, we all see it with Bobby Turner and Kyle Shanahan. We see the ability, the potential there for 49ers starting running back. Let's just make it like old school Tecmo Bowl where they didn't have the rights to the names. But is that 49ers starting running back going to be Carlos Hyde? especially when we're hearing about other backs, Williams and others, Breida, impressing more and getting the coaches excited more.
Yeah, it's tough to forecast what this is going to go like all year. And again, I can't help that feel like Kyle's dad is haunting us, as I can remember the days when I was going out to Dove Valley with you in the summer every year. And it was like every year there was, Tatum, Bell, Mike Bell, Tatum Bell. It was like every year there was a new name. I mean, before that, of course, Mike Anderson, Landis, Gary,
the Terrain Train,
the Terrain Train.
Yeah.
When Ryan Terrain was a hot dynasty commodity, and one after another after another. And it's in some ways like Evil Knievel or something. Like we're gonna pull this stunt off at running back, and he could pull it off. And certainly the Joe Williams story figures in here. But look, Carlos Hyde at his ADP before the draft, third round, I think all of the things you're talking about would make him too risky at that third round. In the fifth round, I think he's actually priced kind of correctly, just because he was such a badass last year. I mean, really, if you'd watched San Francisco at any point last year, he looked like one of the 4 or 5 best running backs playing that weekend. He was just stuck on San Francisco. Now he'll lose the Chip Kelly bump, but there'll be a Kyle Shanahan bump. He's maybe not the best fit. He's probably a better fit for Chip Kelly's running game than Kyle Shanahan's. But if you watch Carlos Hyde, he certainly does have the look of a kind of running back that is not scheme dependent, not a player that is going to lose a lot in a different scheme just because of how high his level of play was last year. So I do think that you're taking a lot of risk with Carlos Hyde because of the 49ers Shanahan handpicked back Bobby Turner situation here. And really, like I said, I'm more concerned about week 14 than week 1. Because I think that as the Niners fall out of contention, if they've already made their mind up, they're not going to make a second contract offer to Hyde, which they very well, when you say they don't like him, that's what I would read that as. I mean, look, Kyle Shanahan brought in Pierre Garçon. So we're not looking at a Jet situation here where they're just punting the season. They're going to use what they have, and certainly Carlos Hyde is something that they have. Carlos Hyde's not going to be on the bench. This isn't like Jeremy Hill or something, and Jeremy Hill's falling to the 19th, 20th round of drafts, where we're looking at our crystal ball and we think, well, he might just be pushed out the door completely. I don't think we're going to see that for Hyde. And I saw enough talent there that in the 5th round, I may take that chance, especially if you're going with a 0 running back. Do the opposite upside down draft where you have no running backs through the first 4 and you want upside in that 5th round. I'm willing to take that chance because Carlos Hyde, we would talk about this with rookies, right? Joe Mixon could go out there in week 1. I talked about this with Charge today on the couch and just make the Bengals tear up their plans. Speaking of Jeremy Hill, like whatever their plans were going into week 1 at running back, Joe Mixon can make it so that he's the plan. I think Carlos Hyde can still do that. And that's worth a 5th round pick in my eyes.
Yeah, and a programming note, I will be out there the second week of August, and because the Broncos are practicing joint practices in Santa Clara with the 49ers. Ooh. And I'm traveling to cover that. So
nice.
Boots on the ground. Plus, we'll have to cram in some more preseason watch lists.
Right.
That's a programming note for us. But the chat room is reacting to that. Definitely lots of George Kittle. It seems like every day I'm writing about something about George Kittle for our newsletter and our newswire at footballguys.com. Make sure to sign up. So all the stories hot and fresh. Don't miss a thing. Listen, there's important things going on right now, just under the radar. But if it's part of a collection of rhythm, of drum beats that we've heard, then it's something you need to know about. Now, Marcus chimes in. Would love to have a Cameron Meredith discussion later. Well, it's later now. So let's discuss Cameron Meredith and thoughts on the Bears offense, the Kevin Whites, etc., and how that ties in this year with what Meredith does. Also, the report about Zach Miller, not a lock. We kind of figured that with his injury history. He's got a low dead money remaining, $500,000 off the top of my head. Plus, they've got Mr. Chipotle, Adam Shaheen there. So, a few tweaks here and there to that Bears passing game. What's that mean for Cameron Meredith?
Yeah, it's interesting because I just did a piece, took a long time, been working on it for over a week, a passing game weekly ceiling study. It's kind of like the running back one I did looking at backfields where I was looking at top 10 finishes for running backs. But for the passing game, I was just looking at 15 plus point games in PPR leagues, or 20+ point games, or 25+ point games, to see which passing games produce the most big games for pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends. And believe it or not, Cecil, believe it or not, and everybody else out there, team that had the most individual receivers go over 15 points last year was Chicago. Unbelievable. They actually had Cam Meredith, Eddie Royal, Deontay Thompson, Alshon Jeffrey, and Marcus Wilson all go over 15 points in a game. Actually, Kevin White didn't do it once. So Cameron Meredith last year is in a passing game that was pretty good at producing big games and spreading them around. This year, those two quarterbacks, Brian Hoyer and Matt Barkley, who sometimes would throw over 40 times a game, are in San Francisco. Now you got Mike Glennon and Mitchell Trubisky. You covered Foxy. You covered his teams. I still can't quite figure out how they became a pass happy team other than they were a losing team. But I can't see them being a pass happy team with Mike Glennon or Mitchell Trubisky. I can't see them getting to 40 or 45 attempts. Why this is
What's
so
funny is they were pass happy and they had the second leading rusher in the NFL.
Yeah.
Jordan Howard. So it was a very interesting dichotomy there.
Very little about how that team went on offense made sense to me. But here's what's interesting to me, okay? And this is why, like, I like what I saw from Meredith. Second-year player, converted quarterback, long-limbed, fluid, certainly a player who seems like a complete natural at the position. But if you look at his big games, his 9 for 130 and 1, his 11 for 113, his 9 for 104, his 9 for 135, in every single one of those games, the quarterback had 40 or more attempts, every single one. And obviously, with the extra targets that he got, he was highly efficient at converting them into production. But in between those games are a lot of mostly uninspiring fantasy games. So if they are throwing the ball more like 33, 35 times a game, and, look, Brian Hoyer still did turn Deontay Hopkins into an absolute beast with his volume and his ability, letting him go make plays. So I'm just a little worried about Cameron Meredith. And also, when I described that there's myriad of targets this year, it's Marcus Wheaton and Kendall Wright. And of course, again, there's Kevin White trying to do something. So I just look at that range of the draft for Cameron Meredith going. And while I can see him providing some value on that, I'm not taking him over John Brown. I'm not taking him over Marvin Jones. There are other receivers I like. I would even argue that at least one of the Baltimore receivers, we could argue over which one of the Baltimore receivers, your favorite Baltimore receiver should go ahead of Cameron Meredith. Maybe your favorite Tennessee receiver should go ahead of Cameron Meredith. They're better situations. I think Cameron Meredith is a player that we haven't seen the best from, but I'm just concerned about how his big games were tied exclusively to games when the Bears threw 40 or more times.
Cameron Meredith, current ADP in 12-team PPR, wide receiver 42, 903. And there's Brown, there's Coleman, there's Decker, there's Davis, there's Macklin. A little bit behind DeSean Jackson as well. Bloom, I'm going to steal this line from Frank Schwab. I'll give him credit this time, and then forever from here on out, it's mine.
Okay.
Jameis Winston could be the MVP this year.
Huh.
Everyone, and one thing from the chat room last week is like, is it the year of DeSean Jackson? I'm like, no, it's the year of Jameis Winston. I think Jameis, they don't need to run the ball. Doug Martin looks great, and he's got to miss 3 games, whatever, and Quiz will get it done, all that, but I don't know how the tight ends are going to go. I just got a Cameron Brate 96 on my Madden Ultimate team.
Nice.
I don't know how that's going to go. I don't know how they're going to work with Brate. How's Howard fit in? He's not playing Clemson, so he's going to do anything because he never did anything in college unless he played Clemson. So let's discuss, especially since Jackson is right there a little bit ahead of Meredith's ADP.
Yeah, I understand this sentiment, Frank Schwab. Just to not let Winston be a stand-in for Tampa as a team. I can see Tampa. We had an ascendant defense. You see what they did to Russell Wilson in the second half of the year last year. They bring back a front seven that is outstanding. They have Vernon Hargraves. I think you're going to see him make some strides in his second year at corner. I think they got this team. Noah Spence making strides. Of course, you got Gerald McCoy. They're bringing back William Golston. Quan Alexander and Levante David, everyone knows what those guys can do. So really, this is a fantastic ascendant defense, especially at home in the second half of the year last year. They have a young offensive line that is gelling. Ali Marpet, Hobart, I think. I only know Hobart because of going to school in Syracuse. That was a big lacrosse rivalry. Anyway, he moved him to center. He's a mauler, so you get another spot there for a good run blocking guard. And I'll get back to run blocking in a second because yes, Jameis Winston. I think you want to take a little bit off of Jameis Winston's plate in the sense that you want to have a nice running game, setting up the deep shots off of play action to DeSean Jackson, setting up Mike Evans, and not having the passing game setting up the running game, which really should bring us around to Doug Martin. And again, talking to Charch on the couch today, all these things are dancing around in my head. But as you look at your ADP meter, Doug Martin is still 7th, 8th, 9th round pick. And yes, you're going to miss the first 3 games. But as I said on the couch, Chase Stewart has done a good job showing us that the first 3 games, and Adam Harstad, they're not as important as the last 3 games. We know we may not have Martin for the first 3 games, but if he's Doug Martin of old, and you talk about the steady drum beats, it's been a steady drum beat about Doug Martin.
Right.
And money speaks, and they're going to pay him $5.7 million coming off of a suspension where it cuts into this year. They're not going to take a running back until the 3rd day, one that has to recover from shoulder surgery, and Jeremy McNichols. They trust Doug Martin. We may look back and think and see they were wrong to trust Doug Martin. He looks like 2016 Doug Martin instead of 2015 Doug Martin. But if they're right, he's going to tilt leagues. You're going to get a running back 1 because you have a good offense, a good defense, an offense that you mentioned Brait. So between Brait and Howard's run blocking and Evans and DeSean Jackson, defenses are going to have to play on their heels. And Jameis Winston's ability to make those throws, somewhat Roethlisberger-esque, to make throws off of big throws downfield off of suboptimal platforms. He's a big, strong quarterback, and a quarterback who's willing to try things. And he's got receivers in Jackson and Evans at the end of those throws that can make things happen. So this is going to be a very exciting offense. It's going to be a very exciting team. If you're looking for a list of 2 or 3 teams where everything could come together and they could be a lot better, like a contender, really, because it's the NFC that has the merry-go-round of contenders.
Right.
NFC South in particular. Tampa Bay could really start to put things together this year. So whether it's Winston or Martin or DeSean Jackson, maybe Mike Evans is the one guy we can't bet on a repeat because it's not all on his shoulders now. This is a team, though, that is going to be better than last year. The only question is how much better.
And that is the big question of the day. The other team, Bloom, that could be, let's take a different look at this team. Everything falls in place for the Titans. Yeah, I think Tennessee with that yes. ground game and yes. Marcus Mariota healthy ascending could be problematic
in the offensive line. And the question there is the defense, and they have some players. I mean, they got Jarrell Casey. They need Derek Morgan and Brian Rakpo to stay healthy. They need those pinchers on the edge, and their secondary is still very suspect. But certainly they're in the right division, AFC South, and Mariota with those weapons, adding Eric Decker. And they already showed that. I will never mock exotic smash mouth again. They already showed they can make that work. And this offensive line is excited to run block for Henry and Murray, and Mariota is going to take another step forward this year with all those targets. So you're absolutely right, because we want, ideally, we're Steelers honks, and there's something to admire about the Patriots, but we want somebody else to get in the mix here. And Tennessee is absolutely the team that can do that. And, maybe this will be the year that the AFC South has some interesting football, because Jacksonville's defense on paper is the best defense outside of Denver, is the best defense in the AFC. It's a fantastic looking defense. They just need to get something functional going on offense. Houston's going to get JJ Watt back, and it can't get worse than Brock Osweiler. Indianapolis has Andrew Luck. That was enough to win the division for a few years. So maybe this is the year AFC South. When we go through those recaps, when we get to the AFC South game, we don't just want to turn the page.
We want to be dialed in as we are on this program, the Audible Live Thursday nights. By the way, speaking of Tennessee, super quick shout out to my man, Cameron Wolfe, going from the Denver Post to be ESPN's Titans beat writer. So congratulations to Cam. We'll miss you out at Dove Valley. Back to the chat room and more of your thoughts. K1F8 says early drafts among rookie running backs are going Fournette, then Mixon, McCaffrey, and Cook. Make sense or nah, Bloom?
It does. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the order I would draft them, or I would recommend them in that order at ADP, because that's the main question: is who do you like best at that price? Fournette's the one that's going to obviously get the biggest opportunity. He's the one with the most draft capital, and he's the one I think with the weakest competition for touches. I mean, Chris Ivory, we love, basically Marshall Lynch, he was human, but we saw his inability to stay healthy and how, he's basically going to be a backup running back. This is going to be Fournette's show. I just don't trust Jacksonville to execute that.
100 fewer passing attempts probably for Bortles.
Yeah, and that's going to contribute to the bottom line for Fournette getting to 300 to 350 carries if he stays healthy. But I think we're going to see a lot of 20 for 77 and 1 catch for 5 yard kind of games out of Fournette this year. I still don't trust Jacksonville to get it all together this year. So I'm not saying
defense works hand in hand with the ground game, though, Bloom. Not just because I'm a Fournette honk and LSU.
No, I hear you, but
let's talk about how that goes back. By the way,
that worked last year.
By the way, Taylor, Jalen Ramsey and AJ Bowie are not the best cornerbacks who won the league.
Exactly. That's why I caught myself. See, so I was like, Jacksonville's the best. Well, outside of Denver,
right?
But I agree with you that the defense is going to key the run game, but that should have worked last year. Now it's possible that the new regime gets things going so that we can really get this thing rolling. Because the defense did add Boye, it did add Calais Campbell. Jeez. And you're basically adding Miles Jack in a full-time role. So Paul Posluszny, late career Paul Posluszny to Miles Jack and Telvin Smith. I mean, those guys are going to be like, just two killer. I'm trying to figure out how you would describe these guys, because they're like heat-seeking missiles, but they can also drop back and do a lot in coverage. They can rush the passer. They're fantastic. So Jacksonville's defense does have a chance to be fantastic, but it was great last year. It was a great defense last year, and that did not key the running game. Maybe some of it's Blake Bortles. I don't know. But look, for Leonard Fournette to return value, let's get down to like return on investment. He's a late second-round pick. So maybe an early third-round pick. So for him to perform at that level or outperform that, he's going to have to, they're going to have to really, that's basically drafting him at his ceiling. I don't see him surpassing that. Joe Mixon, I think there's momentum for good reason, because in your mind's eye, do you really, and we're on the LSU back tip here, do you really see Jeremy Hill holding anybody off? And Giovanni Bernard coming off of an ACL, do you see him being somebody that gives this team pause? And again, this came up with charts on the couch, that Mixon is absolutely a quality player. And I don't know what journalistic ethics, Tyreek Hill and Joe Mixon, should we mention their transgressions? Should we mention their violence against women every time it comes up? Because we certainly don't want to pretend like we're sweeping that under the rug, or we don't care about those things on a personal level, or it doesn't belong in a football conversation. So as we're getting used to talking about Mixon, I'm just talking this out for everybody. And in some ways saying, this is not something easy to resolve, but we're, getting back to what happens between the lines. Mixon by week 2 or week 3 could just take over this backfield. I mean, truly take over this backfield in a 3-down kind of way. He has the skills, pass blocking, the pass receiving, inside, outside, running big plays. So I understand. And again, it was under the heading of, in your draft, you need to draft at least a few players who have a chance to greatly outperform their ADP. Joe Mixon could easily finish this year as a top 10 fantasy running back. Just because, again, it's hard to picture Hill and Bernard being huge obstacles to that.
And it's hard to picture anybody stacking the line against them.
No.
I mean, if you got to worry about A.J. Green and John Ross and a healthy Tyler Eifert, you're not going to put 8 in the box. And that's just plays into the hands of Mixon.
Yeah, as long as Andy Dalton stays upright, because with that offensive line, with those tackles, that's Cincinnati's offense is going to be kind of a high wire act. But at the same time, if it comes through, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be a show, and a show for fantasy. McCaffrey next, and again, I actually think Jonathan Stewart is more of an obstacle than Chris Ivory, certainly, than Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard. Carolina gave him basically what amounted to, I think, a slight pay cut, really, but also assured him that he was still going to be with the team.
And Stewart's a 10th round pick in the experts draft I did last week. I think he went in like the 12th round.
Yeah.
Like everybody's just forgotten about him.
He's falling more and more. Yeah. And he actually had a strong year last year and a strong year the year before, as far as even with Cam Newton taking rushing touchdowns, he still was a quality running back. And I don't think his role is going to be reduced that much from last year. That being said, Christian McCaffrey, if he gets to 60 or 70 receptions, a la, say, Reggie Bush, then he doesn't have to do more than, say, get 8, 10, 12 carries a game and occasionally touchdown. And we know that McCaffrey is good. McCaffrey is, I love the allure of an unknown ceiling. So even though McCaffrey, I could see Fournette getting 300 touches. I can see Mixon getting 300 touches. I can't see McCaffrey doing that. But in a PPR league where receptions are going to be weighted even heavier, I can see him getting to 60 or 70 receptions. I can certainly see Mike Shula, his homework this offseason is reworking the playbook to reflect that you have Christian McCaffrey. And CCU reported before anybody, even when it was scoffed at, that the Panthers were interested in McCaffrey at 8. That was early February. So if they had this idea for that long, that tells me that this offense is going to be reformed, the pass offense, around what he and what Curtis Samuel can add. And then Cook, going back to Charch again, and Charch is up in Minnesota, so he knows. Charch has been giving us inside information on Adrian Peterson for years. He said that he basically expects Cook to become the starter soon. And you just wonder, because this team traded up for Dalvin Cook in the second round. That tells me they had him as a first round quality pick on their board. If they would have known they could have gotten Dalvin Cook, would they have given Latavius Murray $5 million guaranteed? How much is this front office wedded to the idea that they have to get something for their $5 million? That's the big question, right? Because if Latavius Murray is Jeremy Hill, like maybe getting some goal line carries, and
that's a report out today said Latavius Murray will be the short yardage goal line guy.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fine. But Dalvin Cook, with his explosiveness, his ability to make things happen as a receiver out of the backfield, and I really like what Pat Shurmur was doing at the end of the season, last 6 games with McKinnon in 2 back sets. I'm not ready to move on from Jerick McKinnon either, but I don't think McKinnon's going to be that much more of an obstacle for him than, say, Giovanni Bernard would be for Joe Mixon. So really what I'm getting at is I think your draft plan should include one, if not more, of these running backs. And I think they all have potential, except for Fournette, to provide a pretty nice profit. And they're all running backs that, as I was talking about charts today, we spend so long looking at these depth charts and situations in the offseason that we feel like the range of possibilities is pretty narrow. Like they have this plan and they're going to kind of stick to this plan. Plans get torn up very early in the season when you have the kinds of talents that these 4 represent. And in Fournette's case, well, he already is the plan. The others, we have to wait and see.
Audible Live, Thursday nights, footballguys.com, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Many thanks to everybody for subscribing to this channel and for subscribing to our daily Football Guys newsletter. Of course, you can check that out, footballguys.com. It's free to sign up. Do it. And all the latest information is right there to your inbox every single day. Go on vacation. Have fun. Don't think about football. Let us handle that. And, of course, check out our email every single day. Bloom, Drew Brees wasn't lying when he talked about Teron Armstead's injury being a really big blow for the 2017 season. And I was going to say a nut shot or a kick to the crotch, whatever. Sorry, Joe. But, okay, is it Ryan Ramczyk? He's got the hip surgery coming back from. What are they going to do now with Teron Armstead out, 4 to 6 months or out indefinitely or whatever, and having a rookie perhaps and Ramczyk coming to the forefront? How does this impact the 3-headed backfield? And it's interesting to see how Ingram is getting drafted and Peterson is getting drafted now. In the draft that I did last week, Peterson went first ahead of Ingram. And then Kamara was scooped up late. But how does the offensive line changes impact what the Saints do on the ground?
Yeah, and of course we should ask Dr. Jeanne. wish we could get him back now, about Ramczyk and that hip surgery he had in January that all of a sudden becomes a lot bigger deal. At least New Orleans did use that first round pick they got for Brandon Cooks in a way that's almost eerie, to their most important need is now addressed. As far as the running game goes, again, I did the running back study, the running back weekly ceiling study, because I wanted to confirm a suspicion that I had that the Saints, even though they employ running back by committee, are very good at creating big games for running backs. And indeed they are. Only Arizona and Pittsburgh had more than they did. And those, of course, Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson. They produced 11 top 10 weeks last year for running backs, even though we had Tim Hightower mucking up the picture there. And I think that also that doesn't even account for the possibility. Remember, there were no major injuries in that backfield last year. If one of Ingram or Peterson goes down, cha-ching, cha-ching. Although Alvin Kamara might be more of a receiving threat than Travis Cadet was last year, I think this is still a good backfield to invest in, even without Teron Armstead. And I still think, Drew Brees is kind of like the Terminator in some ways. We've been watching him for how many years now in New Orleans with changing personnel and very nondescript personnel. Even Jimmy Graham, who now we think of as a stud, when they drafted him, he hadn't played a lick of football that mattered. He was a project, really, that they took.
Had 17 catches in 1 year for the U.
Yeah. So, what is he really? They did spend a first round pick on Brandon Cooks. They did spend a first round pick on Robert Meacham, who really didn't turn into much. The offensive line has had turnover at different times. I'm not inclined to think that it's going to have a big effect on Drew Brees. The running game, I still think that this offense is so difficult for teams to find ways to keep contained that I'm still keeping a lot of chips on the Saints offense, whether it's Michael Thomas in the 2nd or Snead in the 7th or Ginn in the 11th, 12th, or one of those running backs in the 6th or 7th, or even Alvin Kamara with his PPR potential, because the Saints are always among the leaders in running back targets. This is still an offense I want to invest in.
Audible Live, and you brought up Andrew Luck earlier, Bloom. One thing that I was thinking, and I wanted to hear Dr. Jean's answer, and then I wanted to ask you this later. It's later. With Luck, and again, it's an injury, it's not a suspension, so it's different. And you said it earlier, last 3 weeks are a hell of a lot more important than the first 3 weeks. So if they have to ease Luck in, and he falls in his average draft position, how comfortable are you taking him? Let's say right now he's at 601. He's quarterback 5. In that draft last week, called my shot. It was start 3 wide receivers, flex 2. So I got 5 wide receivers. And I told everyone, I was like, I'm going to get a quarterback in the 7th round. And I got Ben Roethlisberger. I was hoping that Andrew Luck would fall to me. He did not. And I was ready to take Jameis Winston in case I didn't get Big Ben. But kind of playing along that last 3 more important than the first 3, what's your comfort level with Andrew Luck as we sit today?
Well, I'm taking Luck at around ADP, a little after ADP in MFL 10s, where I can take another quarterback. I just teamed him up with Marcus Mariota, so I'm not really worried about him there. In a classic redraft, where I'm just going to take one quarterback, though, it probably won't be Luck. And that's not because I think he's going to end up being a bad pick. He was still a mid-range quarterback 1 last year with the issues that he had. Hopefully, if Dante Moncrief stays healthier, they've got a little more help with Kamar Aiken. We'll see. That Luck is not going to, I don't think he's going to be worse than last year. But at the same time, when I'm looking at quarterback and I'm taking an early quarterback, I might be inclined to just go ahead and spend on Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, whose situations are somehow getting better this year, coming off of the tremendous seasons they had last year, or wait a little bit instead and take Russell Wilson, who I think his situation is getting a lot better this year. If Tyler Lockett is healthy, if Jimmy Graham, we just talked about this in the chat room, if Jimmy Graham is better, his 2nd year removed from his injury. And remember, Wilson played half of the year hurt last year. So it isn't so much that I dislike Luck. It's just that I like other quarterbacks better. But I'm inclined to go along with what Dr. Jean said and not be too worried about him. And there is a possibility that now that he has been playing with this injury for 2 years, now that he has it repaired, we could see it really. Didn't really feel like in 2015, Luck's development just stalled out, right? And we felt like, well, what's going on with him? Well, maybe the golden boy, the anointed one, isn't going to just arrive right on schedule like everybody said. But now we have an explanation. And with that possibility that that's really what was holding him back. And as Jeanne said, he looked good at times last year. He looked like good old Andrew Luck. With his shoulder repaired, maybe we could see that development pick up where it left off in 2015 and see him elevate his game and elevate his fantasy stats.
Just good news for Jack Doyle and company. The coolest name in the chat room, and thanks to everyone for joining us in the chat room. But Randy Randleman is bumping around in the chat room. Randy, what's up, dude? And probably the second coolest name that I can think of off the top of my head. Well, of course, the coolest name ever, former Washington linebacker Tracy Rocker. But Randy Randleman. Bloom, I knew a girl in college named Kimberly Burley. So that was pretty cool. And no, for those knowing, I didn't know her in the biblical sense, but Randy Randleman chimes in with our final question of the night. I'm intrigued by Blunt in Philly. Is he going to be a touchdown machine like last year?
No. I mean, there's just no way he's going to produce 18 touchdowns like he did last year. And if there's a question here, it might be more about Gillislee. If there's a Blunt, it's Gillislee, not Blunt. And if they're going anywhere close to each other in ADP, then that means you want Gillislee, who's going to be inheriting the situation that Blunt did so well with. And he was much more efficient than Blunt on a per touch basis over the last few years. Buffalo. And by the way, it's sad to see Carlos Williams news. I mean, just, man.
Yeah.
I feel like Robert De Niro and Jackie Brown, good, man, beautiful, just anyway. Gillislee at times looked indistinguishable from Williams during Williams' fantastic rookie year. Blunt in Philly, you're looking more at like what Ryan Matthews did last year, but is Blunt even as good as Ryan Matthews? And look, the problem with Ryan Matthews is not his play, it's that he can't stay healthy. And there were a few games last year whenever Philly really got the running game going. Of course, in the win against Cleveland, open the season, Matthews got 22 carries. In the game against Atlanta, he had 19 carries and 2 touchdowns. In the game against Baltimore, back and forth game, he had 20 carries. But they never really fed him. They got Sproles and then Donnell Pumphrey. And you'll love to see that San Diego State Aztec is really starting.
Talk about drum beats, Bloom. That's something that every single week, it's like he's going to take over for Darren Sproles this year.
And he's going to make that role in the offense still very compelling for the structure of this offense, in addition to them having a lot of upgrades at wide receiver. So I just see LeGarrette Blount as like a matchup flex at this point. And I think that it's also possible, although Philly has a good offensive line too, but it's also possible that we might watch LeGarrette Blount in Philly and say like, wow, New England really made him look a lot better than he is at this point in his career.
It is the Audible Live, and I've done a bad thing, Bloom. The chat room fired it up, talking about great names. Dick Trickle, NASCAR.
Oh, yeah. Ron Tugnut.
Can't forget that. We're all 12. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching this program. It's an absolute joy to get to talk football with each and every one of you every single week. And Bloom, you'll have me covered next week while I'm in the Sin City, the city of sin.
Yeah, well, let's see. The 6th, it'll actually be a birthday.
Will we both be on vacation?
Well, I should be arriving in California that day, and it is my birthday, and I would love to be.
Well, it's your birthday. You'll have to take it off. I can do the show from the Strip. See where I'm going here?
Yeah, I see that. It's a holiday weekend. We'll talk, folks. Look, we're not going to leave. This is the time, as I've been saying on the show. This is the time when the NFL rests. We all should rest. Fantasy football players should turn their brains off. Don't just think about fantasy football when you're falling asleep and waking up. Let some other thoughts go through there. But we will still be there for y'all. And logistically, I think that we will definitely have something going on next week.
It is the Audible. I'm Cecil Lammy. There's Sigmund Bloom, Dr. Jeanne Bramall, and Matt Waldman, who's been vacationing as well. Wishing you all the best. Stay tuned and stay frosty.